I mean, it's a big auditorium that can seat like 400 plus people. And we have, a basement space, which is kind of like your typical church basement, and other rooms that can be used by community groups. And we host Recovering from Religion meetings, and we host the Satanic Temple of Missouri, and we occasionally host events from the Skeptical Society of St. Louis and other kind of skeptical and humanist and atheist groups can use our space. And that's one of the huge benefits of having something like a humanist-friendly UU church or a ethical culture society in your city, because often these groups have to meet in pubs or bars and stuff like that if they can't find a dedicated space for them.
I love it, and it's an important value. And now, is the society growing, do you think?
Yeah, we're growing. We have been stable or growing slowly for quite some time. I mean, we're the biggest ethical society in the world at 378-ish members, kind of approaching that 400 number. And we're definitely getting new members every month. It's great that we have the luxury of having 2 full-time leaders, because Kate Lovelady, our senior leader, my chief, as it were, she has really built an amazingly stable foundation for the society over the 10 years that she's been there. It's a very well-run, happy, well-functioning organization. And that means that I can spend the vast majority of my effort reaching out to new communities, speaking to people like you, going on podcasts and writing articles and going to rallies and speaking at vigils to get the message out there that if you are not religious, if you're an atheist, humanist, skeptic, agnostic, but you want a community that you can be a part of that helps you through life, the Ethical Society of St. Louis is there for you. And that's what I absolutely love doing, so I'm very lucky to have a job that I adore.
Yay. Now you mentioned that you can go and give talks to people.
Yep.
How do they reach you and have you come talk, and what would you talk about? So
people often contact me through, obviously, if people want to email me, my email at the Ethical Society is jcroft@ethicalstl.org. And people tweet me on Twitter. I'm at JFLCroft. And I also get a lot of people messaging me on Facebook for events. And generally what happens is that there's an interfaith panel that people are working on, or they have an event about religious diversity, or they simply want, like on Sunday evening, there was a vigil in response to what had happened in Orlando, and they wanted to have someone to speak from a non-religious perspective. And because I'm a visible figure around town now, people just get in touch with me and say, would you be willing to do this? Someone just messaged me on Facebook and said, will you do this? So if people want to get in touch with me, I'm always happy either around the St. Louis area or to travel if it fits with my schedule, as we say in England. If it fits, I'm happy to travel to speak to groups and talk about what we do in St. Louis, or talk about whatever is interesting to them.
Excellent. Well, is there any other wonderful news we want to share before we take a hard turn into reality?
I think I'm good. I'm ready to dive into what's been happening and talk about it a little bit with you.
Yeah, I want to talk about it, but I also wanted to give you a chance to share your good news, as we can call it, and let people know that they can have you come join them. So you mentioned that you get invited to talk at a vigil. What was this vigil for? Why don't you give us some details on that?
So obviously the LGBTQI community in St. Louis, as with the community all around the country and all around the world, was devastated by the massacre in Pulse nightclub in Orlando over the weekend. And there's just been so many ways in which the community has come together to respond to it. And we are very lucky in St. Louis for 2 things. Firstly, we have a very activist, engaged queer community in the city, particularly after all the Black Lives Matter activism that's been going on over the past 2 years, because many LGBTQI people have been involved. And that means that there's a core of people who are ready to respond to things like this, really at a moment's notice. And secondly, we're very lucky to have the first in the United States transgender memorial garden, which is a community space that was envisioned and created by trans members of our community to uplift the voices and the memories of transgender people who suffer and sometimes have been killed through transphobic violence in the United States. And so the event on Sunday evening was a march from the main kind of gay strip in the city down to the Trans Memorial Garden, where we were holding candles and heard from speakers from different community organizations and a political representative. And it was just an opportunity for us to come together collectively to grieve and to express our anger and outrage and confusion and to find power and solace in the love of our community. And the estimates say we had more than 2,000 people marching. I mean, the garden, has a pretty good amount of space to it, and people were stretching. It was totally full, and people were stretching all the way down the street to try and hear and see what was going on. And it was quite a powerful event to see so many people standing there.
No, that is truly amazing, and I wish it would have been a better reason to get together. Just have a big block party would have been much preferred. Do you have any other details about what's happened in Orlando and why it happened? Do you know those kinds of things? Because I'm not really quite sure myself yet.
Wow. There have been so many details coming out. I mean, I can't really run through all the different little fragments of the event that we've learned. I mean, from everything that has come out, it seems like this man may have had elements of, oh my goodness, homophobia spurred by his Islamic background, potentially homophobia spurred by his own struggles with his sexuality. There's reports that he was perhaps a regular at the bar before he did what he did. Any event like this is a complex and extremely difficult thing to parse. I mean, there are many reasons why people do terrible things like this, but it seems like religion was certainly a factor. It seems like internalized homophobia may have been a factor, cultural homophobia certainly, and it also seems like he may have been quite a violent person as well. Reports that he had been physically abusive to one of his previous wives. So it just seems like a whole concoction of overlapping factors. But what we do know is that 49 people were killed and more than 50 injured in what is being called the worst mass shooting in recent American history, and certainly the worst terrorist attack on American soil since 9/11. And it's an extraordinarily painful thing to have happened.
I really appreciate the delicateness of your answer. One of the things that bothers me, I mean, within minutes, a lot of people, and I always try to second guess myself, am I falling victim to the same thing, that they take something so horrible and they automatically throw this out and say, look, I was right when I told you. And you had people with opposing positions. You had people that were saying that, this is a reason why we need more guns. You had people saying this is a reason we need less guns. And you had one presidential elected nominee, whose name I shall not say, Trump, coming out and saying, I told you this would happen. This is all the fault of ISIS and Obama. And, everyone kind of grabs this and makes it about them and what they think it caused it. Have any thoughts on that as a consequence of our culture?
I have to say I've been extraordinarily disheartened, and it's been amazingly painful to read some of the ridiculous responses that this atrocity has sparked in people. I mean, I've seen all those responses that you've mentioned. I've seen people use it, in my mind, ridiculously as an argument that more people should go around carrying guns. I have seen people claim that it was a hoax perpetuated by the government to, I don't even know what, to stoke anti-Islamic hatred or to, distract people from other things that are going on. I have seen people both use it as an excuse for obvious and naked Islamophobia and racism. And I've seen people struggle to totally deny and ignore that there was any religious element at all in the attacks. And it's been extremely painful and depressing to see people kind of fall over themselves to respond in hateful, ignorant, willfully oblivious ways. I mean, one of the most appalling things in my mind has been to see so many public figures, media outlets, and particularly Republican politicians just refuse to acknowledge that this was a hate crime, that this was a targeted attack against the LGBTQI community, that there are just so many instances when it was reported initially on the news or when it's been spoken about in public statements by politicians, they refuse to acknowledge that this was even a gay club that was attacked. And that's unconscionable. It's totally unconscionable. It would be like ignoring the fact that Jews were killed in an anti-Semitic attack, or ignoring the fact that people of color were killed in an attack on a black church. And people from across the political spectrum and people from many different backgrounds have been erasing the fact that this was a homophobic attack from their accounts of the event, and it makes me sick. I've been so mad about it.
Right. Now,
My whole voice is, I'm hearing as I'm speaking to you that my affect, my emotional state is just numb because the weight of what has been happening. I mean, I've gone through the stages of just profound sadness and crying all the time to just total anger and fury like I was this morning, just angry at everything. And now I'm just exhausted. It's just been so much bullshit to deal with, frankly.
Yeah. James, I've never done this before on a show, but do you think it'd be appropriate in a podcast for us to have a moment of silence?
I think that we can leave people to decide for themselves how to respond to it. I love the idea, but I don't know that I could maintain it. I feel like I need to keep talking if I'm going to talk about it at all, because the feelings are very, very close to the surface.
Then let me transition a little bit, but I think
Sure.
still on topic. I don't know if you and I have talked about this. We may have, and some of my listeners won't know that, a good 25 years ago, I actually was a DJ in a gay bar. Did you know that?
Yes, I did know that, and I love that story.
Well, yeah, I've got all kinds of stories, which I'm not going to go into because I don't know that it's the time to be funny. But one thing I did notice back then when I was doing that, and I would come into the bar once, maybe twice a week, and I worked one shift, sometimes two, but sometimes I would come in there, and I had a lot of friends there, and it was a time 25, 30 years ago where almost every couple of weeks, someone I knew died. And it was a place where people could get together and share, and we have the same kind of thing now where these places it's not just a bar, it's a community, right?
Right. You're absolutely right. And that's one of the things that many people do not always understand. These are sanctuaries. And many of these bars have names like Sanctuary and Oasis and Heaven and places like that, because they are places which queer people have built to avoid the violence that we face so often in our everyday lives. I did something at the Vigil on Sunday, which was I asked people, there were just hundreds upon hundreds, more than 1,000 people standing there holding candles, and I asked them if they would raise their candle in the air if they had ever been threatened with violence for being LGBTQ. And every single person there raised their candle. Every single one. And what people often don't recognize, and what the politicians and pundits who are kind of trying to ignore the fact that this was a homophobic attack don't understand, is that we deal with this every day. Whenever you go out with your boyfriend or girlfriend or your significant other, and you have to decide whether you're in a safe space to hold their hand. I cannot tell you how many dates I've been on with guys who will not kiss in public, who will not hold hands in public, who will look